Good day and welcome. My name is Dr. Ken Tonkin, and I'm going to be your guide for the next couple weeks as we explore the world of electronic commerce, e-commerce as it were known. And we're going to start off by asking this question of ourselves: what is e-commerce? Most of us use Amazon. That's a kind of e-commerce. A lot of us use streaming services like Spotify. That's another kind of e-commerce. Many of us work for large companies who automatically buy and sell large amounts of items automatically online. That's also e-commerce. There's a lot of different wrinkles to this subject, and we're going to be diving into an awful lot of them this semester. Just to give you some kind of scope for the size of e-commerce in the United States, if you had to guess for one quarter, the third quarter of 2022, the last one we have reliable data at the time of recording, what sales were? 1.8 billion in e-commerce sales in the United States. And that sounds like a big number, but compared to other commerce in general, that's a small number overall. What does that mean? We still have room to grow in this industry. It's a big increase from the third quarter of 2021, but we didn't see the massive increase that we saw between 2020 and 2021. Why? Well, we were in the middle of a pandemic, and that was one of the forces that actually drove the e-commerce revolution. My point in these slides so far is that although e-commerce is still growing, we're not seeing quite the seismic growth we saw a couple of years back when everybody was stuck at home. Still substantial, though. If we look at power, if we look at consolidation of companies, we look at companies that carry a lot of strength in the industry. If you had to guess, the big 500-pound gorilla, Amazon, what percentage of all e-commerce sales were they for the year of 2022, at least as of December, the most recent numbers we had? If you had to guess, if you guessed almost half, you'd be correct. Now, some of the estimates go as low as 37%, but even if we go on the low end, that's one business-to-consumer company, one company controlling minimum 37% and maybe as much as 49%. What does that mean? Yeah, they're a big company. They're hard to take on, but there are ways to compete, make no doubt. We're going to be talking about how some companies also have decided to go away from Amazon. If you had to guess who was the next biggest provider of business-to-consumer e-commerce after Amazon, who would you guess? These are all big players. If you guessed Walmart, you are correct. Now that sounds like, hey, we've got some staunch competition here, and Walmart is heavily investing in e-commerce. Well, not so fast. These guys are really down the charts. If you look, for example, they've got a total of 6.3% of e-commerce sales. So if we go by the most conservative estimates, and the number one business-to-consumer vendor in the United States is Amazon with 37%. Their number two is 6.3%. Yeah. Talk about having a lead. This is an industry where a lot of power has been consolidated. So the holiday season was actually up between 2021 and 2022, but again, the growth rates are slowing down. The question is, what's slowing this down? Well, we've got a more challenging economy now in 2023, and the walk from 2022 into 2023. We have more people who are not getting things like stimulus payments and have less discretionary incomes against a backdrop of inflation. So yeah, our holiday season, when the numbers finally come out, will not be as rosy as the previous holiday season. So at the same time, we've got all these companies that are struggling. At the time I'm recording this lecture, for example, Bed Bath & Beyond is getting ready to announce bankruptcy. So what's happening? We've got some retailers who adapted to the new model really well. We've got others who have not. We've got some who you wonder how they're still around. And so we're going to be talking about what makes a successful business and why there are winners and losers in this supposed level playing field. So other trends that we're seeing right now, we're seeing more people use social media for shopping, and some of the controversy surrounding that is simply, are we spending too much time on social networks? What about influencing kids? Are we actually giving truthful statements about products? At the time of recording, AI is breaking big in the news. And the idea now that we're going to be able to use what we refer to as contextual searching. Rather than having to enter in a bunch of different search terms, we could simply ask our computers a question, and chatbots like OpenAI and whatever Google comes up to come against it will do a lot of that searching for us. We're also seeing now that instead of just personalization, we're seeing what we refer to as contextual shopping. And that means that more companies are building databases that analyze us based on our behavior. Brands are trying harder than ever to get directly in touch with consumers. There's a reason why Nike has shoes that you can only buy on the app. They want to get to know you. And speaking of Nike, there are some brands who are starting to say, why should Amazon have all the fun? Why can't we sell direct as well? We're also seeing mobile is having an unusual, I shouldn't say unusual, but maybe a sort of unexpected influence. When you think about mobile, we think about being able to buy things from anywhere. In reality, mobile is helping enable a lot more local and regional e-commerce. Why? Because we take our phones everywhere, and if we're out to dinner or suddenly need some supplies wherever we're at, we're going to look around us. And mobile e-commerce is becoming local as well. We're seeing now that a lot of people who are working for online companies, particularly e-commerce, may not be where we think they are. I know that we've always had call centers located other places, but even the person waiting on you in the drive-thru at McDonald's may not actually be on site at McDonald's. We're seeing more analytics that are coming real time, and we're seeing more companies that are doing their own research instead of buying from third parties. And finally, what about alternative payment systems, things like cryptocurrency? Yeah, I would not say that crypto is in the mainstream yet. We've seen a lot of winners and losers there, but rest assured, the big payment providers are paying attention to the way that people want to buy and sell. So that is changing the way we do commerce. Again, if we look at the growth of smartphones, we're seeing more traffic from smartphones than browsers at this point in time, and most Americans at this point are using smartphones. At least the research products have not actually purchased products. So the times, they are changing. Other things to think about. We are seeing now that Google seemed infallible for years, and more people are starting to say, are there alternatives? What is the most obvious alternative to Google in the mobile environment would be an app. I don't need to search Google for a pair of Nikes. I can go to my Nike app. I can go to my Amazon app. We're seeing now that things like AI are going to power more intense, powerful, and accurate voice searches as well. We learned over the pandemic that it was okay to pull up to a grocery store and have our groceries delivered curbside, and more people are starting to say, well, why can't we do this all the time and simply have personal shoppers do this for us? And again, more people are relying on social media for news, shopping, all of the like. In the old days of e-commerce, old days being 10 years ago, I would have said 100% you need to have a dedicated website. These days, your storefront might be your social media because it's become that powerful and accepted. So let's get into what is going on in the world of e-commerce. This is called the beginning of the revolution, because we are still in the early stages of what could be potential, what could be the great potential of e-commerce. So let's get in and talk about it a bit. So what are we going to learn in this chapter? We're going to learn, number one, why we should be studying this stuff, why we should take time to reflect on where we've been and where we're headed. We're going to also define some key terms in here, give you an opportunity to outline what the major kinds of e-commerce are, and to really explore why it's a discipline worthy of consideration. So really, when we think about it, our textbook says we're in the first 2 decades of e-commerce. I'd go as far as to say we're moving into our third. From my opinion, I would say that the e-commerce era really started around 1995. That was the year when people started getting internet access at home en masse. So we're still seeing rapid change and a lot of disruption in these markets. Technology is moving so fast, I can honestly say as an instructor that I have to prep this class as a brand new class every time I teach it because things are changing so quickly. And why should we be studying this stuff? Well, even if you're a bricks and mortar retailer, and even if you're a local retailer at this point in time, you can no longer ignore the online world, because even if you're not doing things there, your customers probably are. So we're going to talk about all of those models. So in terms of what e-commerce is, essentially if you're using the internet to buy something, you're using e-commerce. We've got a formal definition there, but specifically, e-commerce is using the power of the internet to purchase things, whether it's business to consumer or business to business. It's the idea of purchasing through the internet. So what's the difference between e-commerce and e-business? Anything that uses technology or connectivity to make a business more efficient or more connected is e-business. E-commerce is one part of e-business. Just happens to be a part that we're all talking about a lot of times these days. Why? Because it's speeding up business as a whole. So what are the building blocks? What powers our ability to have e-commerce? The first is obviously that we've got the internet. Many of you will be surprised to find out, we get into Chapter 3, for example, that the internet's lineage goes back to the 1960s. We've also got what we refer to the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web and the internet are not the same thing. The World Wide Web is a service on the internet which makes it easier to browse and find information. Just like Google, for example, is not the internet. It's an index of the internet. We're going to define what those terms mean as we get through the class. And we talk about the deep web versus the surface. There are millions of web pages out there that you can't find on a search engine. We call it the dark web. And also these days we would be remiss if we did not talk about the importance of mobile apps and mobile commerce, because this is the way in which most Americans and most people in the world are accessing the internet these days. We call it the mobile web, and it is the way of the now and the future. So what are some of the trends that we're seeing? Well, over the last several years of our lives, I hear something happened in 2020. Were you guys aware that something happened in 2020? Well, we got into the idea that the COVID-19 changed the way we buy and sell, but it also served as kind of a springboard for e-commerce to go to the next level. We started realizing that things we normally buy in store, we could buy online. There's a reason why people now are shopping for common necessities online, and a big part of it is because COVID-19 made it necessary. We're also seeing that the cloud computing and the Internet of Things are becoming big parts of our lives as well. When we say the Internet of Things, we simply mean devices that are not necessarily computers that are connected to the Internet. The most obvious examples I can think of are televisions and refrigerators, smart TVs, smart refrigerators. And the mobile platform is possible in the first place because we have cloud computing. Our cell phones are not really inherently that powerful, but they don't need to have powerful processors when they have fast networks that can connect them to powerful central processors. Hence, we have small, very powerful devices. All of this technology produces something we refer to as big data. And what that means is our behavioral patterns get analyzed in data. We leave a trail on the internet. We leave an impression based on how we behave, and we create impressions. There's a way that advertising networks are able to build pictures of us, and that's through big data. Now, all this stuff comes with concerns. We're giving up more of our privacy all the time. We're seeing more and more companies consolidate, so a smaller amount of very powerful companies holds a lot of sway in the markets right now. And these are things we should be concerned about. Regardless of which side of the equation you fall on, and regardless of your beliefs about the market, fewer competitors generally is dangerous to the well-being of all. So we get into what makes e-commerce unique. There are 8 unique aspects. The first is called ubiquity. Ubiquity, the word ubiquitous means it's everywhere. So everybody has access to it. There's more people in the world who have smartphones than running water. So the person who lives in a developing country who might not enjoy secure housing or good plumbing probably still has a smartphone. So we can say it's anywhere. That also goes with the idea of global reach, that we can buy and sell from anywhere, and the world of drop shipping is showing us opportunities and hazards there. Universal standards. If I have a Google phone and you have an iPhone, we can still talk. If you have a Mac and I have a PC, we can still exchange information, because these devices were based on universal standards and things like HTML, for example, that power the web, make it ubiquitous and universally accessible. Information richness. Do we have things like video? Do we have interactive types of media that make products come alive? And speaking of interactivity, how do we interact with companies? These days it might be with AI, but are our companies building relationships with us? Information density simply means you can find a lot of information on the products or services you're interested in. Personalization and customization. I guarantee if everybody in this class shared their Amazon home screens, they would all look different, because we all have different interests, and the companies that we work with are smart enough to try to appeal to our interests. And finally, social technology means if you like it or if you don't, you're probably going to share it. Amazon satisfies all of these examples between their mobile app, the very fact that they're drop shipping from everywhere, the fact that it doesn't matter if you use an Apple product or a Google product. You can find video reviews, you can find media reviews, and even interactive 3D models of products. That you can get your questions answered by a human or a chat bot. There's lots of content for you to review. That your homepage looks different than everybody else's when you log in. And finally, even if you look at the review section, it's very easy to share our opinions about things. And so Amazon satisfies all these criteria. Then we get into types of e-commerce. And to be clear, you can have more than one type of e-commerce. There's business to consumer, which simply means we're selling to people, not other companies. And this will be the bulk of what we talk about in this class. I do have a business to consumer emphasis, even though the business to business market is technically much bigger. Business to business is what it says. We're selling en masse from one business to another. And that was the root of e-commerce in the first place. You'll find that out when we get into the history. Consumer to consumer. Whether you're using Facebook Marketplace or eBay, the root of this kind of stuff was to have an online flea market, to be able to exchange products or services between each other. Mobile e-commerce, again, you can see that over 60% of the population is using that as their primary means of internet access. And so you could have mobile and consumer to consumer if you're using Facebook on your mobile device to go to Facebook Marketplace. That would also be social e-commerce because we're using social networks. Whether you're using Snapchat or Instagram, they're very good for visual products. And again, all of this is enabled to be local, largely due to the fact that we're relying on mobile devices so much for so many of these things. I'm not going to read these stats to you other than to say that we are seeing a steady upward climb on where we're going to head. The predictions are by the time we hit to 2024, we're going to be in the $1.8 trillion range in business and consumer e-commerce. And again, if you look at the revenue, it's linear. We had a little drop off around 2008. Something happened there called the housing crisis. Mobile commerce, same deal, and we're going to see it become an even bigger part of e-commerce as we continue. We started off, the roots of e-commerce in our world are business to business. We had Baxter Healthcare who realized you could very quickly restock orders instead of manually having to call somebody up or to write out a spreadsheet and say we need more of drug X or Y. Why not automate this stuff? And so these were order entry systems we started using. Car part suppliers got into it as well. And then we have what we refer to as EDI standards. What that meant was that if you were using a database of a different program than I was, that was programmed by a different manufacturer, we could still find ways to exchange data and to be able to stay connected with each other. So that meant we had our first idea of standards-based data exchanges. And French Minitel, again, was getting into doing things like medicine at a distance. Those are the roots of e-commerce. 1995 was a big year, I remember, because I was there. That's how old I am. And it was the idea that, wow, you can buy things on the internet from your house. People were very distrustful at first. This was a new and crazy idea, and it took off over the world of dial-up, and everybody said this is going to change everything, and they weren't wrong. It did change everything. How it changed everything didn't turn out how anybody expected. The thought was we'd end up with a utopic world of perfect competition, where if you were the first to market, you could dominate based on people knowing who you were, but that anybody could easily compete. And the original optimism of this era got smashed when the market came crashing down in 2000, when all these early profit models failed to materialize. We had great ideas, but terrible business plans. We went through a period of consolidation during an economic downturn right after the 9/11 attacks. And we started realizing, wow, we need to have real business models behind this. And that's where we started seeing the growth of things like Google and actual search engine advertising. That we started seeing venture capital wasn't as readily available, and if you wanted somebody to invest in your e-commerce business, you had to demonstrate that it had legs, that it would be able to go on its own. We went from Amazon selling books in the 90s to companies selling all manner of things, and also learning that services were a great market for the internet as well. And again, all of a sudden people are saying we need to be online. So things were changing. During 2007 and beyond, again, we're heading into the housing crisis, but technology was hitting kind of a good point. We had what we referred to as Web 2.0. Prior to Web 2.0, most people didn't have their own websites or presences on the network, on the internet. At best, maybe an email account. Social media meant anybody could create a website. With mobile platform that started growing as well, BlackBerry hit the market in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, and the game was changed forever when the iPhone debuted in 2007, which was giving us the idea of local and mobile e-commerce. Also, the birth of Google Maps, which also happened to work on an iPhone, spurred this as well. We also started seeing that, hey, you can do entertainment on the internet as well. Keep in mind that the networks weren't as robust then as they are now, but we started seeing the potential for things like Netflix, and we also started realizing that marketing would inherently change. Instead of trying to sell somebody something, we want to build a relationship with you, and to that point, all of a sudden companies had a great resource to be able to find out what their customers actually wanted. By monitoring our traffic on the net and getting customers to give up their data, you can make products and services that your customers actually want. So in terms of how this all started, we look at 95 to 2000 was really the invention phase, consolidation, when a lot of the big players who are still big today, the Amazons of the world, started really coming together. And we are right now in a period of reinvention. There's been some casualties. We'll not say it's all been rosy. If you want to know, for example, why Toys R Us is no longer with us in the United States, it was not just because of competition from people like Amazon. It was because the market had changed and the idea that students and kids and young people no longer wanted toys. They wanted devices. They wanted data. They wanted things that were driven by things like digital entertainment. So content is more powerful than ever. So in terms of, has this been a success or not? Has e-commerce worked out? I don't think anybody in their right mind would say that we haven't seen a good run here, and that exciting and powerful things in the world of commerce are still happening today. That being said, the original ideas behind this, the idea that we were going to have this utopic, perfect competition environment, I think we all can agree that doesn't exist. Some of the things that we were hoping for, at least thought would happen, the idea being that everybody would have consistent pricing because we would have openness and transparency, hasn't really happened. In reality, depending on where you get your information, you have different ideas on things like cost. So we have what we refer to as information asymmetry. And there are new intermediaries, meaning we're buying from different people, like social networks. So even though Amazon is very ubiquitous and people know who they are, they don't always have the lowest price. And we don't always have all the information like we thought it was going to work out. So the world is different than we expected. What are some other surprises we had? Business is always fast. We always talk about the need to operate quickly in the world of business. In reality, in this new uncertain environment, sometimes the first mover does not have the advantage. For example, if we look at the world of social networks, I'm betting most people in here do not have a MySpace page. MySpace was out before Facebook, and Facebook got to learn from their mistakes. The startup costs for e-commerce, the ideas behind it were that it would be simple, easy, and cheap. And in reality, to make a good presence these days, it's none of those things. We have to spend time and money to make presences that are worthwhile and well-designed and that can scale. The mobile platform, if anybody in this class lived through the 90s, there was a time when companies would give away smartphones to get sales, to get more people to sign up. And what happened was that the networks, the cellular networks, were not able to keep up with demand. And so mobile e-commerce started off really with companies trying to really chum people in and then having to raise rates and raise prices to keep up with the monsters that they had created. And then we also had the emergence of on-demand e-commerce. We are living in a world now where if you live in certain cities, you can get stuff delivered same day from Amazon. So we group these themes into several areas that we'll be exploring the whole semester. The first is obviously technology. It's e-commerce, which means electronic, which means the tech is a key part of it. The tech keeps getting better, but that does not come without challenges. We have moral, ethical, and technological challenges to face. The new business models are making it tougher to compete, and meaning also that you have to respond more quickly and know what's going on with your competitors. It's a challenging environment. And in society as a whole, there are haves and have-nots, and there are impacts we could have never, ever perceived. as much as it's great to be able to buy things online, there are entire sections of the population who are left out. Why? If you can't get a credit card, how do you purchase online? So the new economy is not always inclusive based on where you are in your walk of life and the types of finances you have available. So alongside the internet, we saw a change in computing in general. If we go from the 1950s, when we had building-sized computers to do things like payroll and accounts receivable, I'm thinking like Watson. They used to call IBM Big Blue, for example, to the idea of mini computers, which meant that we were doing some independent processing in the 70s and 80s. The networks weren't there. You'll notice we did not have high-speed networks, so a lot of this stuff was not networked. Individual computers ran functions. So we get to the era of personal computers in the 80s, meaning people are starting to do word processing at home. Then at the same time in the 80s, local area networks started emerging on campuses, on corporate and college campuses, and finally we start getting to enterprise-wide computing. And what that means is the companies were setting up their own networks. Finally, in the 90s, we start getting into the internet, meaning that companies could have connectivity at a global level without spending massive amounts of money on building their own private networks. We're getting into things like VPNs, for example. So some of the things we look at, again, if you're interested in e-commerce, there's a technical side and there's a societal side as well. We're going to be talking about both. I also think it's important to remember that the things that we have created, the things that we live with every day, there are implications to them as well that get into our societal realm. You notice I have a picture of the social network Parler. And this is not meant to be a political statement, whichever side of the political argument you are on or in the middle of. Parler was a social network that was founded by individuals with very conservative beliefs. Whenever Parler went online, they took an anti-censorship statement that anything you wanted to say was fine. What Parler didn't account for was that they were using Amazon Web Services and that the content that was being posted violated the terms and conditions of Amazon Web Services Content Police. Long story short, Parler was kicked off of its service, and the people who were using it no longer had access to be able to post the types of content they wanted to post. So the question here, regardless of your belief system, we start talking about things like free speech. We start talking about self-expression. At what point do industry and free speech collide? At what point are we trusting so much to companies that the way we speak and the way our voices are heard will be dependent on what companies we invest with? Those are the things we need to think about. And so that's something we put up here. Again, regardless of which side of the argument you're on, this is not a common carrier. This is not the idea of equal time necessarily. And we are in a world where for-profit companies can control a lot of the flow of information. And that is something we need to talk about in the course of studying e-commerce. So this is the beginning of our conversation. There are possibilities. There are careers. There's lots of potential out there. So I hope that you have enjoyed this introduction. I look forward to working with you all semester. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.